The story I'm going to tell you is one of my own, but it's based on real occurrences that happened along the Antrim coast many years ago. Kate looked out of the window at Parlour's Port. Certainly, clouds had covered the coast in a mantle of darkness, but the harvest moon hung in the sky, suspended like a great orange disc, just at the meeting point between water's edge and horizon. She could only hope that Alec's prediction, old Alec, that his weather prediction would be accurate, that the clouds would continue to cover the moon long after midnight and so provide safety for the anticipated visitors. It wasn't the first time that Kate had taken part in a smuggling venture, and that's what was planned for the evening. If the moon gave too much light, it could mean danger for any smugglers. Kate and her sister Annie were the only inhabitants at Parlour's Port, but they weren't the only members of the smuggling team, because women from the neighbouring village of Carnlough also took part. They had to supplement the meagre income scratched from the land by their husbands and sons, and they did this through the proceeds from the sale of goods brought in by smugglers from France. Fine wines, rich and full-bodied, the dark red colour of pomegranates, tobacco that had a deep, almost fruity smell, perfumes that were guaranteed to make even the plainest girl alluring to her lover, and silks so fine and light that they were almost transparent. The goods would be taken by horse and cart, surreptitiously, up to the bustling market town of Ballymena, and there sold on to wealthier folk. If all went well that night, the smuggled goods would be brought into one of two caves at Garran Point. If the tide was high, it would be the upper cave, but if the tide was low, the goods would be brought into the cave at the foot of the cliff. Kate looked at her sister Annie. She envied her younger sister's optimistic attitude. Ever since their mother had died 4 years previously, Kate had taken on the role of worrier. "Did you fetch in the water and did you put the latch on the cow pen?" she asked anxiously as she poked the fire. "I did, Kate." Annie was always patient with her older sister. Although she was reading a book, she kept glancing out the window, so full of excitement at the adventure that was to come. She knew that she would have to reread the whole chapter the next day. "It's the moon I don't like. If the clouds don't come in, there'll be nothing to keep us safe from the water guard." The preventative water guard were a team of men stationed at the Largy Road in Carnlough. 12 men whose sole purpose in life was to catch the smugglers. If there was even the slightest suspicion, they would send up a flare which would illuminate the whole night sky and summon men from along the coast as far afield as Ballycastle and Larne to converge and catch the smugglers. One of the smuggling team that night would be Kate and Annie's younger brother Johnny. He was only 14 when their mother died, the baby of the family, and if anything happened to Johnny, it would break Kate's heart. The two girls sat in silence as the flames leapt blue and orange in the grate. The kettle hissed contentedly on the fire, occasionally spitting on the red-hot coals below. In front of the hearth there was a rug, which provided a quiet base for the chair in which Kate was rhythmically rocking. Tramp was on the side of the fire in his bed. He was totally oblivious to the adventure that was to come, and to either side of the fire were two cot beds where the girls normally slept and could benefit from the dying embers of the fire. Kate looked out the window. A cloud had drifted over the moon. As the minutes ticked by on the mantel clock, it was followed by others, and finally she announced, "It's time." The girls got up and put on their shawls, obscuring as much of their faces as possible, just to make sure that they couldn't be seen by anybody. They went out the door, put it on the latch and stepped out into the night. The path to the caves was dangerous. It snaked down to a junction with no fence on the seaside to protect them from falling. And there one strand climbed up to the cave at the top of the cliff, while the other went down to the cave below. But the two girls were as sure-footed as goats. They knew every crevice, every jagged rock. It didn't deter them in the slightest. As they got to the junction, Kate looked at the water and knew that the goods would be smuggled into the lower cave that night. So the girls descended, but as they did so, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. Looking round, Kate saw with relief that it was men and boys from the village come to lend a hand as the goods were brought in. As the little party wound its way down to the cave at the bottom of the cliff, Kate wondered where the boats were. The cave was empty as yet, but then she thought she heard the splash of an oar in the distance. And then there it was again. But the boat couldn't even use a light for a signal, so much was the danger from the water guard. They had to rely on local knowledge and Kate's ingenuity. She imitated the call of an owl, woo, woo, and was delighted when she heard a faint response in return, woo, woo. Then, looking, Kate saw a hulk of more substantial blackness in the dark and knew that the boat was approaching. Such was the perfection and timing. They wouldn't have to leave the crates lying in the cave tonight. They could be handed straight out, and then the boat would make a quick exit to ensure that it was not left stranded by the outgoing tide. The crates, which were tightly sealed, would be handed over hand to hand up the chain, up the path, up to the house at Parlour's Port, where the two girls could examine the goods. As each crate was handed in, the men passed them on up the line, and then when the last one was handed over, a figure jumped over the gunwale of the boat and planted a kiss on Kate's cheek. She knew it was Johnny. She was delighted, but knew he would save a more demonstrable, affectionate greeting for the house when they went in and had tea. As she turned to go up the path, suddenly she heard a shot fired. It was the water guard. Someone must have given them information, someone that was greedy for money had handed over the knowledge of what was happening, and now the water guard were upon them. The party were tied with their hands behind their back, marched up the path. The crates were thrown to the side with the goods strewn all over the ground. Those goods would not be taken to Ballymena that night. Up the road to the station at Largy Road they were marched and put into cells, each on their own. There was nothing to shield Kate from the chill, cold floor but her thin shawl, and she lay frantic with worry about what would happen to Annie and Johnny. But then, in the wee small hours, the peephole on the cell door was pulled back. "Is that Kate McGavick?" The voice was stern, but there was a friendly undertone, and as Kate jumped up, she looked at the deep blue set eyes and knew that it was a former lover of her mother, who had waited for her lover when he was at sea, but when he didn't return, given up and then married Kate's father. "I'm going to let you out now, but never let me see you come back here again." "But what about Annie and Johnny? What's going to happen to them?" "They're waiting for you at the side door." The guard led Kate to the side of the station, opened the door and pushed her out into the night. There were Annie and Johnny waiting. She was so relieved. The three walked down the hill arm in arm, down to the house at Parlour's Port where the kettle was still hissing on the fire. A pot of tea was made and put on the table, and they sat down and thanked their guardian angel for delivering them to safety. Thank you.